Imagine this, a quiet neighborhood, peaceful streets, and neighbors who mostly keep to themselves. Everyone seems to follow the rules, the lawns are mowed, the mailboxes stand in neat rows. But beneath this calm surface, something wild is about to happen, something that no one saw coming. It starts with a few complaints. Maybe someone says a house looks abandoned. Maybe the grass is a little overgrown. Maybe the paint is chipped, or the windows are dark. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, hears these whispers and decides to take action. After all, they're supposed to keep the neighborhood looking nice, right? But what if their idea of nice means bulldozing a house, without even checking who owns it? Now, here's where the story gets crazy. The house they target. It doesn't belong to just anyone. It belongs to a federal agent. Someone who works for the government, someone who protects people, who takes care of serious business. And yet, this person's home is about to be knocked down, not because of any crime or neglect, but because of a big mistake. Can you imagine coming back after a long day, or even a long trip, to find your home flattened? The place where you kept your memories, your belongings, your safe space, just gone? That's exactly what happens here. And it all starts with a bunch of assumptions and a rush to judgment. But why would an HOA bulldoze a house without confirming who owns it? Aren't there rules? Isn't there some process to follow? You'd think so, but sometimes power and a little impatience lead to bad decisions. Maybe they thought the owner abandoned the place. Maybe they just wanted to set an example. Whatever the reason, their mistake is about to cost them big time. And the person on the other end of this, the federal agent, he's not just going to sit quietly and accept this. This isn't a neighborly dispute over a fence or a noisy party. This is serious. A federal agent's job is demanding, and he's used to handling difficult situations. But losing your home because of careless HOA actions, that's a battle he's ready to fight. Think about it for a moment. What would you do if you came home to rubble? If the place you called home was no longer there? Would you get angry? Sad? Would you take legal action? Or would you be speechless? This story pulls at those emotions and makes you wonder how far an organization can go before crossing a line. But there's more to this than just anger or sadness. There's a lesson about power, responsibility, and respect. When groups like an HOA start acting like judges, juries, and executioners, things can get dangerous. Because they don't just affect one person, they affect a whole community. And as the story unfolds, you'll see how things spiral. How a neighborhood that thought it was doing the right thing ends up caught in a legal nightmare. How a federal agent uses his skills, not just to protect the country but to protect his own rights. And how a simple misunderstanding turns into a headline-making drama. This isn't just a story about a house being bulldozed. It's about what happens when people forget to check the facts. When assumptions replace investigation. When the desire to control leads to chaos. And it's about the unexpected ways justice can show up when least expected. So, stay with me because this story has twists and turns you won't believe. It's a powerful reminder that every action has consequences, and sometimes, those consequences come from the most unlikely places. The next part will dive into how the HOA made their decision, why they thought the house was abandoned, and what signs they missed. But for now, think about what you would do if your home was suddenly taken from you, all because someone else thought they had the right to make that call. The story really begins to unravel when you look closer at the HOA's decision. How did they come to think that this house was abandoned? After all, homes don't just disappear overnight. There are usually signs, letters in the mailbox, lights on inside, cars parked out front. But in this case, the HOA seemed to act on little more than assumptions and hearsay. It all started with a few neighbors mentioning the house looked empty. Maybe the grass was a little taller than usual, or maybe no one was seen going in and out for a few weeks. These little details piled up and gave the HOA the impression that the place was neglected. They began to see it as a problem, an eyesore that could bring down property values or attract unwanted attention. But instead of knocking on the door, sending letters, or trying to contact the owner, they skipped right to drastic measures. Imagine being part of the HOA board. You feel pressure from the community to keep the neighborhood looking perfect. Maybe some board members were impatient or wanted to send a message to other homeowners about following rules. It's easy to get caught up in that kind of thinking, where you believe you're doing the right thing, even if it means acting quickly and without all the facts. What makes this situation even stranger is that the HOA never knew who actually owned the house. They had no idea that the owner was someone important, someone with authority far beyond the typical homeowner. The federal agent who lived there had been away on a long assignment, which is why the house appeared empty. He had been doing his job, working in the background, protecting people, while his home sat quiet and still. When you think about it, the HOA's mistake was a perfect storm of miscommunication and assumptions. No one checked official records or made an effort to reach the owner. Instead, they treated the situation like an open and shut case. And that's when things started to go terribly wrong. As the HOA moved forward with their plan, they began organizing the demolition. Bulldozers were scheduled, and workers were hired to clear the property, all without the knowledge or permission of the homeowner. The neighborhood might have felt relieved at first, finally, that abandoned house would be gone. But relief quickly turned into shock once the truth started to come out. This raises an important question. How could a community organization with so much responsibility make such a huge error? Aren't there checks and balances? Normally, yes. HOAs are supposed to follow strict rules and legal procedures, especially when it comes to private property. But in this case, those rules seem to have been ignored or overlooked entirely. The HOA's confidence in their decision may have blinded them to the consequences. They believed they were protecting the neighborhood, but instead, they were destroying a person's home. And not just anyone's home, one belonging to a federal agent whose job is to serve and protect the public. The irony of the situation was impossible to miss. You might wonder, did anyone try to stop the demolition once they found out who owned the house? Unfortunately, by the time the truth came to light, it was already too late. The bulldozers had done their work, and the house was gone. The damage was done, and the fallout was about to begin. Neighbors who had initially supported the demolition started to question what had happened. How could the HOA act so quickly without making sure the facts were right? How could they ignore the possibility that the owner might be away temporarily, especially in a world where people sometimes have to leave their homes for long periods because of work, family, or emergencies? This situation exposes the dangers of rushing into decisions without proper investigation. It shows what can happen when authority is used without care, and when assumptions replace patience. And it highlights how easily a community's trust can be broken when mistakes like this happen. At the same time, it's a reminder of how important communication is. If the HOA had simply tried to contact the owner or check official records, none of this would have happened. Instead, a devastating mistake led to a homeowner losing everything, and a neighborhood facing a serious problem that no one wanted. As you think about all this, remember that behind every property, there's a person with a life, a story, and rights that deserve respect. The HOA's failure wasn't just about a house, it was about overlooking those human elements and making a decision that affected a real person's life in a huge way. The next part of the story will take us into the moment the homeowner finally returns and discovers the destruction. You'll see how this federal agent reacts, how he confronts the situation, and what happens when someone with power and determination fights back against an injustice like this. The story gets even more intense from here. When Daniel Carter finally stepped off the plane and made his way back home, he was exhausted but looking forward to some peace. Serving as a federal agent often meant long hours and stressful assignments far from family. But the thought of returning to his quiet neighborhood, the comfort of his own house, was what kept him going. What he didn't expect was to be met with a scene that looked like it came straight out of a nightmare. Driving down the familiar street, Daniel's eyes caught something immediately. It was his property, but it wasn't the house he had left behind. Instead, there was a giant empty lot where his home once stood. Dirt, debris, and the remains of what was once his safe haven stretched out before him. The house that had held his memories, his belongings, and everything he'd worked for was gone. Bulldozed flat. His first reaction was disbelief. Could this really be happening? Had he misread something? Was it some kind of prank? But no, the sight was painfully real. His home was demolished. The place where he expected to relax and recharge after his hard work was now just a pile of rubble. Shock quickly turned to anger. How could this happen without any warning? How could a homeowners association just decide to tear down a house without even contacting the owner? Daniel wasn't just any homeowner. He was a federal agent, someone who worked within the law, and he expected the law to protect his rights. But here, the rules had been ignored. He called the HOA immediately, demanding answers. The person on the other end seemed calm, almost indifferent, explaining they thought the house was abandoned. They said they had sent notices, but Daniel had never received any. It was clear there had been a massive communication failure, or worse, a careless decision made without proper checks. Daniel's mind raced. His job had trained him to handle crises, to stay calm under pressure, and to investigate every angle. Now, it was his own home that needed protecting. And unlike many others, he wasn't going to let this slide quietly. The federal agent was ready to fight back. The news about the demolition quickly spread. Neighbors, initially curious, started to gather details. Some were sympathetic, others were shocked that the HOA would take such an extreme step. It wasn't long before local media caught wind of the story, and suddenly, Daniel's personal disaster became a public spectacle. With the media attention came pressure on the HOA to explain themselves. Board members faced tough questions about their decision-making process and whether proper procedures were followed. People wanted to know how a mistake like this could happen. And Daniel, ever the determined agent, was ready to hold them accountable. The legal battle that followed was intense. Daniel had to prove that the HOA acted without authority and that their actions caused him significant damage. It wasn't just about the physical house anymore, it was about respect, justice, and the principle that no one should lose their home without due process. At the same time, Daniel's story sparked conversations beyond his neighborhood. People everywhere started to question the power held by HOAs, and how those powers could sometimes be abused. It raised awareness about the rights homeowners have and the importance of protecting those rights, even against organizations meant to serve the community. Despite the emotional toll, Daniel remained focused. His experience as a federal agent gave him an edge in navigating the complex legal world. He understood the importance of evidence, of staying calm, and of fighting for what was right. And while the road ahead was tough, he was ready to face it head-on. Meanwhile, the community itself was divided. Some supported Daniel, feeling sorry for what he had gone through and worried about what this meant for their own homes. Others sided with the HOA, believing that rules should be enforced strictly to keep the neighborhood safe and orderly. The conflict revealed the fine line between community standards and individual rights, a balance that can sometimes be difficult to maintain. But through it all, one thing was clear: the mistake that led to the bulldozing was more than just a simple error. It was a warning sign about what happens when power is wielded without care. And it showed the importance of communication, respect, and taking the time to verify facts before making life-changing decisions. Daniel's return and discovery became a turning point, not just for him, but for the whole neighborhood. It challenged the HOA to rethink how they operate and reminded everyone that behind every house, there is a person whose life can be turned upside down in an instant. As you follow Daniel's journey, you'll see how this federal agent uses every skill he has, not only to fight for his home but to demand accountability. It's a story about standing up against injustice, about the power of resilience, and about what happens when ordinary people refuse to be silenced. This is just the beginning of a battle that will test the limits of power, law, and community. The next chapters reveal the fallout, the legal battles, and the surprising twists that come from this unbelievable situation. You won't want to miss what happens next. As the dust settled from the destruction of his home, Daniel realized the fight was far from over. The bulldozers had done their damage, but the real battle was just beginning. With his house gone, he knew he had to take action, not just to seek justice for himself but to stop the HOA from doing the same thing to anyone else. Daniel's first step was legal. He reached out to attorneys who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. The law can be a tricky place, full of fine print and loopholes, but Daniel was no stranger to navigating complex systems. With his federal background, he understood the importance of patience and precision. Every document had to be scrutinized, every detail checked. The case quickly attracted attention. This wasn't just about a house being demolished, it was about a government agent standing up to an organization that many people blindly trusted. The story tapped into a larger conversation about power, responsibility, and the rights of homeowners. Suddenly, what had seemed like a neighborhood issue was now a symbol of something much bigger. HOAs often have strict rules about property upkeep, and they're given authority to enforce those rules. But what happens when that authority is misused? Daniel's case highlighted the dangers when HOAs don't follow proper procedures, when they skip important steps, or when they act without clear evidence. It was a wake-up call for communities everywhere. As the legal process unfolded, Daniel discovered how many others had faced similar problems, homes threatened or damaged by overzealous HOAs. It was a reminder that these organizations, while meant to maintain order, can sometimes become bullies if left unchecked. The balance between community standards and individual rights is delicate, and Daniel's fight brought that tension into the spotlight. Meanwhile, the HOA were scrambling. Board members had to defend their actions publicly, explaining how they came to such a drastic decision. Their argument was simple: they believed the house was abandoned and that they had the neighborhood's best interests at heart. But their failure to verify ownership or to properly notify Daniel left them vulnerable. The community was divided. Some residents supported the HOA, feeling that rules were necessary to keep the neighborhood safe and attractive. Others felt deeply for Daniel, recognizing the injustice of bulldozing someone's home without proper cause. Conversations around kitchen tables and online forums buzzed with debate. What rights do HOAs really have? How much power is too much? Daniel's resilience was inspiring. Instead of backing down, he used his experience and determination to push forward. He gathered evidence, spoke with witnesses, and worked closely with his legal team. His goal wasn't just compensation, it was accountability. He wanted to make sure that what happened to him wouldn't happen to anyone else. The case also opened up discussions about communication. If the HOA had taken just a little time to contact Daniel, to check property records, or even to speak with neighbors, this disaster could have been avoided. It showed how vital it is to listen and verify before making decisions that affect people's lives. As the story gained momentum, it also brought public scrutiny to the broader issue of homeowners associations and their sometimes unchecked power. Daniel's battle became a catalyst for change, encouraging communities to reconsider how they manage rules and enforcement. It sparked conversations about fairness, due process, and the rights of individuals living under HOA jurisdiction. The media coverage only intensified the pressure on the HOA. Stories ran on local news, interviews were shared online, and people everywhere began paying attention. The situation no longer felt like just one man's fight, it was a reflection of a much larger problem in neighborhoods across the country. Daniel's journey revealed the importance of standing up for your rights, especially when those rights are challenged by organizations with a lot of control. His case was a reminder that homeowners deserve respect and fair treatment, no matter who they are or what their job might be. At the same time, the HOA's misstep served as a cautionary tale. It showed how important it is for community organizations to act responsibly, follow procedures, and communicate clearly. When those things break down, the consequences can be devastating. As the legal battle moved forward, Daniel and his team prepared for what could be a long fight. But they were ready. The stakes were high, but so was their determination. Daniel's story was becoming a beacon for others facing similar struggles, a sign that with courage and persistence, it's possible to push back against unfair treatment. This chapter in the story is about more than just lawsuits and legal jargon. It's about community, fairness, and the power of one person to challenge the system. The ripple effects of what happened here would soon be felt far beyond that quiet neighborhood street. The next part dives deeper into the public reaction and the unexpected consequences that came from the HOA's actions. It's a reminder that sometimes, when you try to control everything, you lose control of what really matters. And for Daniel, the fight for his home and for justice was only heating up. The aftermath of the bulldozing sent shockwaves through the community, rippling far beyond the boundaries of that quiet neighborhood. People everywhere began to question the power that HOAs hold and whether it's being used fairly. Suddenly, Daniel's personal story wasn't just about one man's loss, It became a conversation about the rights of homeowners everywhere and how easily those rights can be trampled. Local news stations picked up the story quickly. Reports detailed the shocking incident of a house being destroyed without the owner's knowledge, and the fact that the owner was a federal agent only added fuel to the fire. Interviews with neighbors showed a mix of emotions. Some expressed sympathy for Daniel, others voiced concern about the HOA's methods. Social media lit up with debates, sharing the story across platforms, drawing attention from people who'd never thought twice about HOAs before. What made this situation so gripping was the question of accountability. Who is responsible when a mistake this big happens? The HOA members who authorized the demolition found themselves under intense scrutiny. Some tried to defend their actions, claiming they followed procedures, but others admitted to rushing the process. The neighborhood that once trusted the HOA began to doubt them, and many residents demanded changes. Daniel became a symbol, not just of one man's fight, but of standing up against injustice. His background as a federal agent gave him credibility and strength, but it was his persistence that won people over. He was clear about wanting more than just compensation. He wanted to ensure that no one else would suffer the same fate. His case became a rallying cry for homeowners feeling powerless against their associations. The legal battles took a life of their own. Daniel's attorneys pushed hard, uncovering documents and communications that revealed a lack of due diligence on the HOA's part. It became clear that the notices they claimed to have sent were either ignored or never delivered. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding, it was negligence that had destroyed someone's property. Beyond the courtroom, the story sparked legislative interest. Lawmakers started paying attention, asking tough questions about the scope of HOA powers. Could an association really decide to demolish a house without proper verification? Should there be stricter regulations to protect homeowners? Daniel's experience opened doors for discussions about reform, making it clear that something needed to change. Within the neighborhood, the atmosphere was tense. Some residents felt betrayed by the HOA, worried that if they could bulldoze one house without consequence, no home was truly safe. Meetings grew heated, with passionate debates about the future of community governance. Others wanted to give the HOA the benefit of the doubt, believing that mistakes happen and that the focus should be on improving communication moving forward. As the media spotlight stayed on the story, Daniel found himself speaking publicly about his experience. Interviews, podcasts, and community events gave him platforms to share the dangers of unchecked HOA power. He wasn't just telling a personal story anymore. He was educating people, warning them about what could happen if homeowners don't stand up and demand fairness. But it wasn't only about the fight against the HOA. Daniel also spoke about resilience, how losing a home is devastating, but it's possible to rebuild. His determination inspired many who faced their own battles, reminding them that justice is worth fighting for, even when the odds seem stacked against you. The HOA, meanwhile, faced consequences beyond the courtroom. Some board members resigned under pressure. Policies were reviewed, new safeguards were proposed, and the community pushed for more transparency. It was a wake-up call that exposed weaknesses in how the neighborhood was managed. This story highlighted a crucial point: power needs limits. When groups like HOAs have too much control without oversight, people get hurt. Homes are more than buildings, they're where lives unfold, where families create memories. When that's threatened, it shakes a community to its core. Daniel's story also made people reflect on the importance of communication and due process. The HOA's failure to properly notify the homeowner wasn't just careless, it was a serious breakdown in respect and responsibility. It reminded everyone that before taking drastic actions, there must be effort to understand and verify. Across the country, homeowners began sharing their own stories, times when they felt steamrolled by HOA rules or unfairly targeted. Daniel's case gave them a voice, showing that it's possible to push back and demand change. It sparked a movement, small but growing, to hold these organizations accountable. As this chapter in Daniel's journey unfolded, it became clear that the bulldozing was not just an accident but a catalyst for greater awareness. It forced communities, lawmakers, and homeowners to rethink the balance between rules and rights. And it showed how one person's fight can ignite a conversation that reaches far beyond a single street. The story continues to develop, with new twists, challenges, and surprises ahead. But the impact of what happened that day, when a house was bulldozed without the owner's knowledge, will be felt for a long time. It's a powerful reminder that every action has consequences, and that standing up for what's right matters, no matter who you are or where you live. The fallout from the bulldozing incident didn't just stay local, it stirred up conversations on a national level. People began asking serious questions about the extent of HOA powers and whether those powers were being regulated enough. Daniel's case was turning into a landmark example, a cautionary tale for homeowners across the country who might be vulnerable to similar abuses. As news outlets continued covering the story, experts weighed in on the potential legal and ethical implications. HOA boards are meant to serve their communities, but this case showed how those boards can overreach, sometimes with devastating results. The fact that Daniel was a federal agent added a layer of irony. Here was someone who upheld the law professionally, and yet his own rights were trampled without due process. What stood out most to many was the lack of communication and transparency. HOAs often operate with minimal oversight, relying on volunteer board members who may not always fully understand their responsibilities or the limits of their authority. This incident revealed how dangerous it can be when decisions are made in haste, without thorough investigation or proper notification. Daniel's story sparked a wave of activism. Homeowners began organizing to demand reforms that would protect their rights. Grassroots groups formed, pushing for clearer laws around property rights and HOA powers. They wanted stricter rules ensuring that no property could be altered or demolished without clear, documented consent from the owner. In some states, legislators started drafting bills inspired by the case. Proposals included mandatory notifications, longer waiting periods before enforcement actions, and more rigorous checks on HOA decisions. Daniel was invited to testify before committees, sharing his experience and urging lawmakers to take action. His voice gave a human face to what had previously been an abstract issue. Meanwhile, Daniel himself was rebuilding his life. Losing a home is more than a financial loss, it's emotional and psychological. Yet, he channeled his frustration into determination. He began looking for a new place to call home, one that he could secure and protect. The process was long and difficult, but he faced it head-on, just as he had faced the legal battle. The community where the incident happened wasn't the same anymore. Some residents grew wary of the HOA, demanding changes in leadership and governance. New policies were introduced to increase transparency, including regular audits and open meetings. The HOA board members were urged to receive better training about their roles and legal limits. Daniel's fight also led to greater public awareness about what many homeowners didn't realize, that HOAs can sometimes act with considerable power, sometimes even more than local governments in certain areas. This raised concerns about balancing the benefits of community regulations with the fundamental rights of property owners. Social media became a hub for sharing stories of HOA disputes, unfair fines, and questionable enforcement actions. People found comfort and strength in knowing they were not alone. Daniel's story inspired many to speak out, to challenge unfair practices, and to demand better protections. As the legal case dragged on, new revelations emerged. Internal emails and meeting minutes showed that some HOA members had been warned about the risks of bulldozing without proper authorization but ignored those warnings. The decision wasn't just careless, it was reckless. This evidence added weight to Daniel's claims and increased public outrage. The media continued to spotlight the story, inviting experts to discuss homeowners' rights and HOA accountability. Talk shows, podcasts, and online forums featured heated debates about the balance between community rules and individual freedoms. For many viewers, Daniel's experience was an eye-opener, revealing how something seemingly straightforward can quickly spiral into disaster without safeguards. Despite the challenges, Daniel remained a symbol of resilience. He used every opportunity to educate others, emphasizing the importance of knowing your rights, staying informed, and standing firm when those rights are threatened. His story became a blueprint for others facing similar struggles. At the same time, the HOA's reputation was severely damaged. The board faced lawsuits from multiple residents, some citing Daniel's case as evidence of systemic problems. Calls for a complete overhaul of the HOA structure grew louder, with some advocating for outside oversight or even the dissolution of problematic boards. The incident also prompted broader discussions about the nature of community living. People questioned what community really means when the rules are enforced without empathy or fairness. It raised the question, how do you balance maintaining order with respecting the individuality of homeowners? Daniel's battle revealed the complexities behind these questions. It showed that while rules are necessary, they must never come at the cost of justice and respect. And it reminded everyone that behind every house number is a human life, deserving of dignity and fairness. As the story continues to unfold, it highlights the power of one individual to challenge an unjust system. Daniel's experience isn't just about a bulldozed house, it's about standing up, speaking out, and fighting for what's right, even when the odds seem overwhelming. This ongoing fight promises more twists, challenges, and lessons for homeowners everywhere, keeping us all watching closely.